True recognition is earned, not merely expected, a lesson some of us clearly still need to learn.
The applause was still echoing off the glass ceiling when Linda Mercer lifted the microphone and said, clear as a knife sliding across porcelain, my daughter has always been a burden. Not difficult. Not misunderstood. A burden. For one suspended second, the whole room forgot how to breathe. And I smiled. 8 months earlier, on a damp February morning in Savannah, Natalie Mercer was standing in the conservation wing of the museum with a cold cup of coffee in one hand and her mother's cardiology paperwork open on her phone in the other. Around her, wooden crates stamped with customs seals waited to be opened, each one holding pieces for a visiting European exhibition the board had spent 2 years courting. A donor from Charleston was arriving before lunch. A glass case had to be recalibrated. One of the registrars was out sick. The lighting schedule for the East Gallery had been revised twice overnight. And still, before Natalie answered a single work email, she had already rescheduled her father's follow-up appointment, renewed her mother's pharmacy refill, and texted her aunt the login information for a church fundraiser Linda had somehow locked herself out of again. That was the shape of her life. She held entire systems together so quietly that people mistook her labor for gravity. At 34, Natalie was the senior exhibitions coordinator at the Mercer Museum of Coastal Art, though half the board still called her that lovely girl from events, as if she merely arranged flowers and smiled beside catering trays. In truth, she was the woman who kept international loans from collapsing, who soothed arrogant collectors, who caught legal errors before signatures dried, who could stand in an empty gallery and see the finished room before anyone else knew where the walls should breathe. People underestimated her because she let them. It was efficient. It kept rooms calm. It made other people comfortable. Her mother had built an empire on that comfort. Linda Mercer, 58, was a woman who moved through life as if every space had been waiting for her specifically. She called it being involved. She called it caring. She called it family. What it meant, in practice, was that nothing around Natalie was ever allowed to belong entirely to Natalie. Not her apartment lease. Not her haircut. Not the blue silk dress she wore to openings. Not the rhythm of her own exhaustion. Her father, Thomas, was 60 and soft around the edges in the way kind men sometimes are when kindness has slowly curdled into surrender. He loved his daughter. Natalie knew that. She also knew he had spent most of her life loving peace more. That afternoon, while a curator from Boston complimented the humidity controls and a donor asked whether the museum planned to expand its modern wing, Natalie's phone lit up with her mother's name. "Are you free?" Linda asked the moment Natalie picked up. "I am at work, Mom. It will only take a second. I was thinking about your recognition dinner. I could call the venue and make sure they use proper linens. Those banquet people never understand elegance unless someone explains it." Natalie closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Outside the office window, Spanish moss swayed in the gray light like something whispering warnings from the trees. "The museum is handling it," she said. "You are a guest. You do not need to do anything." A pause. Small. Silken. Dangerous. "I am your mother," Linda said, and under the softness was the old claim of ownership. "People will expect me to be involved." Natalie looked through the glass wall of her office at the main gallery where technicians were positioning a sculpture under track lights. One adjustment. Then another. 1 inch too far left and the whole room would feel wrong. "No," she said quietly. "They will expect you to arrive at 7. Across town, in a ranch house that still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old resentment, Linda lowered her phone and stared at the dining room table. Thomas watched her from his chair, newspaper folded but unread in his lap. He knew that look. It was the look his wife wore when a door had closed where she believed no door should exist. "She is shutting me out," Linda said. Thomas did not answer quickly enough. At the museum, Natalie slipped her phone face down on the desk and let the silence settle. Then she turned to the email she had been avoiding all morning. Portland Museum of Civic Arts formal offer attached. Her pulse did not leap. It steadied. She opened the document. Director of Public Programs. Full relocation package. More authority. More money. A different coast. A different sky. A life with sharp edges and clean air and no one calling. To ask for passwords in the middle of a workday as if her time had been born owing them something. Through the office glass, staff moved briskly under her direction. Crates opened. Checklists shifted. A donor laughed. Somewhere down the hall, a young assistant told another employee, "Ask Natalie. She will know what to do." And that was the truth of her life, was it not? In every room that mattered, she was the one people turned toward when things needed saving. Every room except one. Natalie read the offer once. Then again. Then she looked at her reflection in the dark screen of her dead coffee, at the woman everyone mistook for manageable, for dutiful, for small. A burden, they would call her later. But the woman sitting in that office was not a burden. She was load-bearing. And for the first time in years, with the February rain tapping lightly against the museum windows and Portland glowing from a document on her desk like a door cracked open in the dark, Natalie allowed herself to imagine what might happen if she stopped holding everything up. By late spring, Natalie had become an expert in surviving the kind of wound that never bled in public. The first cut came at a family anniversary dinner 2 years earlier, the kind of evening that looks warm in photographs and feels colder the longer you sit inside it. Natalie had planned nearly all of it. The private room at a riverfront restaurant. The florist who agreed to build low ivory centerpieces that would not block conversation. The archival prints of old family photographs, mounted and framed in brushed gold. The lemon cake her mother loved but would never admit she loved because delight, in Linda Mercer's world, had to look effortless. 23 guests came. Aunts in silk blouses. Cousins who arrived late and acted as if lateness were charm. Neighbors who had known the Mercers long enough to confuse familiarity with intimacy. Natalie floated through the room in a navy dress, answering questions before they formed, redirecting the waiter when an allergy issue appeared, adjusting the playlist when the sound dipped into a dead corner of the room. She was doing what she always did. Holding the evening together with invisible hands. Then dessert arrived, and Linda leaned back in her chair with a smile polished bright enough to blind from across the table. "It is such a relief," she said, glancing around as though inviting the room into a private joke, that Natalie finally found a career suited to her temperament. She has always been better at arranging pretty things than dealing with serious matters. Laughter fluttered where it should not have. Not cruel laughter. Worse. Polite laughter. Borrowed laughter. The kind people give when they sense a hierarchy in the room and do not want to stand on the wrong side of it. Natalie felt the heat rise under her skin, sharp and humiliating. She could have said that the museum trusted her with 6-figure acquisitions and shipping timelines that crossed oceans. She could have said that one missed signature on a customs form could cost more than anyone at that table made in a year. She could have said that beauty, handled properly, was serious. Instead, she lifted a coffee cup that was no longer warm and asked her aunt whether she wanted more cream. That was how she had been trained. Absorb the blow. Save the room. The second cut came the following autumn after she returned from Atlanta, where she had delivered a keynote at a regional museum symposium. It had gone well. More than well. Her session had been packed. Senior directors had taken notes. A man from a major institution in Chicago had introduced himself afterward and asked for her card with the careful, respectful tone people use when they understand they are speaking to someone with real authority. She drove straight from the highway to her parents' house because Linda had insisted on Sunday supper. The dining room smelled of roast chicken, rosemary, and the faint powdery scent of the candles her mother lit even when no guests were coming. Thomas asked how the conference went. Natalie had barely begun to answer when Linda cut in. "Just do not let all this professional attention go to your head, darling. Ambition can make a woman look hard. Men notice that. Thomas lowered his eyes to his plate. Natalie watched him do it. Watched the quiet surrender settle over his shoulders like an old coat he had stopped trying to take off years ago. For a moment, something furious and bright flared in him. She saw it. He saw it too. But he did nothing. He reached for the salt. On the drive home, rain-streaked. The windshield in silver lines. Natalie sat in her parked car outside her apartment building long after the engine died, hands slack in her lap, staring at her own warped reflection in the dark glass. It was not the insult that hollowed her out. It was the predictability of it. The way joy became smaller the moment she carried it home. The third cut was the deepest because it cost her something tangible. 4 months before the recognition dinner, Natalie was hosting a private preview for a potential donor couple considering a major contribution to the museum's expansion campaign. The morning had been choreographed down to the minute. Fresh catalogs. Controlled lighting. Champagne resting in a silver bucket near the east wing. The wife loved maritime portraiture. The husband funded architecture. Natalie had designed the route to charm both. Then Linda walked in through a staff entrance with a woman from church and a tote bag full of homemade lavender sachets she thought the gift shop should sell. She had not asked permission. She had not even considered that permission might be required. Natalie's stomach dropped so fast it felt like a physical fall. Linda smiled, kissed the air beside her daughter's cheek, and began introducing herself to the donors as if the museum were an extension of her living room. She laughed too loudly. She touched things she should not have touched. She told a story about Natalie being bossy at age 8, as though competence were a family anecdote instead of the force holding the institution upright. The donor stayed courteous. Wealthy people always do. But the rhythm broke. Attention scattered. The wife looked faintly alarmed. The husband shortened the visit. A week later, the museum received a gracious note delaying any funding decision until the next fiscal cycle. Natalie read the email in her office and knew exactly what had happened. Linda had not come to destroy anything. She had come because she believed access to her daughter was a permanent right. The damage had simply trailed behind her like perfume. That night, Erica listened without interrupting, then set down her wineglass with deliberate care. "You know what the real problem is," she said. "Your mother thinks your life is a room she can enter without knocking. And your father has spent so long calling that normal he cannot even see the door anymore." Natalie looked down at her phone. On the screen was a reminder she had made months before. Recognition dinner. 7 in the evening. For the first time, the event stopped looking like a celebration. It started to look like a line. By the time summer began pressing its heat against Savannah like a warm hand that would not lift, Natalie had stopped mistaking exhaustion for loyalty. The museum moved through June in long, elegant waves of controlled chaos. School tours in the morning. Donor lunches in the afternoon. A restoration delay in the coastal wing that threatened to shove 3 weeks of scheduling sideways. Natalie handled all of it with the same calm precision she used to fasten a necklace clasp one-handed or rescue a collapsing timeline without letting anyone hear the strain in her voice. From the outside, she looked composed. Inside, something older and quieter had begun to shift. The call from Portland came on a Thursday evening while she was still at her desk, the museum nearly empty around her. The last of the staff had gone home. Through the tall office windows, the city had softened into gold and shadow. A cargo ship moved slowly along the river in the distance, silent from this far away, massive and deliberate. Natalie let the phone ring once before answering. "This is Adrian Cole from the Portland Museum of Civic Arts," the voice said. "I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." He was not. In truth, she had been waiting for his call with the taut stillness of someone standing in front of a door she had already decided to open. Their interviews had stretched across 2 weeks. First the formal panel. Then the strategic conversation. Then the private discussion about what kind of authority she would need to rebuild a public program from the ground up. Adrian had not spoken to her as if she were useful support. He had spoken to her as if she were infrastructure. As if he knew exactly what a person like Natalie could carry. "We would like to make you an offer," he said. She listened in silence as he laid it out. Director of Public Programs. Full relocation support. A salary high enough to make her sit back in her chair. Creative control. A January start. Room to build. Room to lead. Room. When the call ended, Natalie did not cry. She did not laugh. She simply sat there with the phone in her hand, listening to the museum hum around her, the low electrical breath of lights and climate control, the faint rattle of an air vent in the hallway. For years, she had lived inside rooms that were already defined for her. Useful daughter. Reliable fixer. Quiet woman. This was the first offer that felt like an answer to a self she had never been allowed to speak aloud. She called Erica from the parking garage 20 minutes later. "You took it," Erica said immediately. "I have not said yes yet. That is not what I asked." Natalie smiled despite herself and leaned against the warm hood of her car. The concrete garage held the day's heat like memory. Above her, twilight deepened between the beams. "Yes," she said softly. "I am going to take it." Erica exhaled, and Natalie heard joy and grief collide in that sound. "Good. About time." They met the next night at a narrow bar near the river, a place with dark wood, low amber lights, and the kind of soft jazz that made truth easier to tell. Erica arrived in a linen blazer and sat down like a woman reporting for duty. "Tell me everything," she said. So Natalie did. The title. The apartment listings she had already started saving in Portland. The relocation timeline. The strange, fierce calm in her chest. Then, after a pause, the other part. "I am not telling my parents yet." Erica did not blink. "Of course you are not." Natalie looked down at the ring of water gathering beneath her glass. "The recognition dinner is in October. They still think it is just a museum event. A nice speech. Some wine. My mother has already tried 3 times to insert herself into it." "And you are going to let her come," Erica said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I do not, she will spend the rest of her life saying I shut her out for no reason." Natalie lifted her eyes. "If I do, then whatever happens will happen in a room full of people who actually know who I am." Erica went very still. "Not a trap," she said at last. "No." Natalie's voice was calm now, almost frighteningly calm. "Witnesses." The word settled between them. After that, Natalie moved with startling clarity. She signed the Portland offer on a Tuesday night at her kitchen table with the windows open to the humid dark. She applied for a 1-bedroom apartment in a brick building near the streetcar line. She created a folder on her laptop and named it after. And then, almost with reverence, she began preparing her exit. At home, she started noticing the invisible machinery of her family with a sharper eye. The insurance portal passwords she reset without comment. The automatic charitable donations Linda liked to boast about but had never learned to schedule. Thomas's cardiology reminders. His prescription refill calendar. The spreadsheet tracking deductible payments. The holiday cards Natalie drafted and her mother signed as if generosity were a performance requiring only the final flourish. One evening she deliberately did nothing. She did not remind Thomas about an appointment. She did not answer Linda's text asking for a password she could have found in her own notebook. She did not reorder a refill. She simply set her phone face down and waited. No one said thank you because no one noticed the silence. Not at first. That, more than anything, made her understand the truth. She had not been appreciated. She had been absorbed. 2 days later, Linda called with a tone sugared to a dangerous shine. "I was thinking, sweetheart, since people may want to hear from me at your dinner, perhaps I should prepare a few remarks." Nothing long. Just something meaningful from a mother's perspective. Natalie stood in the museum corridor, one hand resting against the cool plaster wall, and watched a registrar wheel past a crate of framed works from Lisbon. "No, Mom," she said. "There will not be any family speeches." A beat. "I only want to help." "I know," Natalie replied. "You are a guest." This time, when she ended the call, her hand did not shake. That night, back in her apartment, she folded 3 sweaters into a cardboard box and wrote one word across the side in black marker. Portland. Then she sat on the floor beside it in the hush of her living room and understood, with a steadiness that felt almost holy, that she was no longer planning an event. She was building a door. Natalie arrived at the museum 1 hour early, though she would have denied that it was nerves. Habit was the cleaner word. Habit sounded professional. Nerve sounded like weakness, and weakness was the one costume she had worn for too many years in rooms that never deserved her truth. The recognition dinner was being held in the glass garden pavilion behind the east wing, a long room of steel frames, candlelight, and climbing ivy trained so carefully along the walls that it looked effortless. By 7 in the evening, the whole space glowed amber and green. Linen napkins folded like white wings. Crystal glasses waiting in quiet ranks. Place cards resting in their holders with the calm certainty of decisions already made. Natalie moved through the room with the cool focus of a conductor before the first note. She adjusted a chair by half an inch. Repositioned a floral arrangement that did not truly need repositioning. Checked the microphone. Checked it again. Her dark green dress skimmed her frame like water in low light, elegant without begging to be noticed. She wore no necklace. No armor but posture. Guests began arriving in soft clusters, bringing laughter, perfume, handshakes, silk, polished shoes, and the low bright energy of people pleased to be somewhere beautiful. Trustees. Curators. Donors. Artists. 2 journalists. 3 staff members from the education wing who had once watched Natalie salvage a collapsing children's program with 15 minutes notice and a box of broken craft supplies. They greeted her warmly, and more than warmly, they greeted her with recognition. Real recognition. The kind that has weight. A sculptor from Charleston clasped both her hands and said the museum would have lost half its soul without her. A donor couple from Hilton Head told her their grandchildren still talked about the coastal history installation she had built the previous winter. Her director raised a glass before dinner had even started and murmured, "You carried this institution through its hardest season." Carried. There it was again. The word everyone used when they actually saw her. At 7:22, Linda and Thomas Mercer arrived. They came in together, but not as one. Thomas looked as he always did at formal events, slightly uncomfortable in a blazer, shoulders too aware of themselves, eyes already searching for his daughter. Linda entered as if the room ought to pause and rearrange itself around her. Her gown was deep burgundy silk, elegant and just a shade too dramatic for the evening. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were not. Natalie saw it at once. That tiny recalculation. That flicker. Linda looked around and found no room waiting for her to take command. No church friends. No relatives primed to nod on cue. No one who knew her stories. These were Natalie's people. Natalie's world. Every face in that pavilion belonged to someone who had watched her think, solve, rescue, build. Linda stood in the center of a room that loved her daughter for reasons she could neither control nor diminish. Thomas hugged Natalie first. A real hug. Brief, tight, almost apologetic. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said. For one dangerous second, she nearly softened. Linda kissed the air beside Natalie's cheek. "Charming room," she said, smiling with all her teeth. "A little modern for my taste, but lovely." "Thank you for coming," Natalie replied. Dinner unfolded with polished grace. Speeches from the board. A short tribute from the museum director. A slideshow of exhibitions Natalie had led, budgets she had saved, partnerships she had revived, impossible deadlines she had made look easy. The room laughed in the right places, sighed in the right places, applauded with increasing warmth. Natalie stood and thanked them with controlled sincerity, her voice steady, her hands still. From across the candlelit tables, she could feel Linda growing quieter. Not calmer. Quieter. That was different. It happened just after dessert was served. A chocolate tart. Burnished pears. A scatter of sugared rosemary. Someone at the far table was telling a story about a shipping disaster in New York when Linda rose from her chair with a wineglass in one hand and the smooth, fatal composure of a woman who had decided silence was no longer serving her. She did not ask permission. She simply crossed to the microphone stand before anyone fully understood what she was doing. Natalie felt the room shift before the first word landed. A tightening. A hush. The instinctive stillness of human beings sensing something about to break. Linda lifted the microphone and smiled into the light. I think, she began, her voice warm enough to pass for loving if you did not know where warmth could hide a blade, that since everyone is celebrating my daughter tonight, perhaps a mother should add a little honesty. Thomas went pale. Natalie did not move. Linda drew a breath. The truth is, she said, Natalie has always made life heavier for everyone around her. Even as a child, she was not easy. Not joyful. Not grateful. She always needed so much. So much attention. So much correction. And if we are all being honest tonight, she has always been a burden. No one spoke. Not one fork touched porcelain. Not one glass lifted. The whole pavilion went silent in a single violent sweep, as if the room itself had recoiled. Thomas stared at his wife like a man watching his own house burn from inside it. Across the tables, faces changed. Shock first. Then disbelief. Then something harder. A cold, collective judgment Linda had not anticipated. She had aimed for humiliation. She had found witnesses. Natalie set down her fork. Once. Cleanly. Then she stood. No shaking. No tears. No pleading. She crossed the room in measured steps, each heel strike small and precise against the stone floor. When she reached the microphone, Linda still held it for half a second too long, as though some part of her believed control could be recovered through grip alone. Natalie took it gently. Then she looked at her mother, and the whole room felt the temperature drop. Thank you, she said. 2 words. Soft. Clear. Devastating. Linda blinked. Natalie turned, not to her mother but to the room. Thank you for giving me a life where I learned how to carry impossible weight, she said. And thank you, Mother, for finally saying out loud the one thing I needed to hear before I left. A ripple moved through the crowd. Confusion. Alarm. Recognition. Natalie handed the microphone back to the stunned event coordinator at the edge of the stage, lifted her clutch from the table, and slipped on her coat with unhurried grace. Thomas half rose from his chair. Natalie, but she was already walking. Past the candles. Past the ivy. Past the faces turned toward her not with pity, but with something deeper. Respect. Fierce, aching respect. At the pavilion doors, she stopped only once and glanced back. Linda still stood at the microphone, exposed at last beneath the full brightness of a room that no longer mistook motherhood for moral authority. Then Natalie pushed open the glass door and stepped into the savannah night, where the air smelled of river water, jasmine, and freedom. Natalie did not cry until she was halfway across the bridge. Savannah shimmered behind her in the rearview mirror, all gold haze and reflected river light, beautiful in the indifferent way cities often are when they have just witnessed the ending of a life and gone on glowing anyway. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel. That surprised her. She had expected shaking. Collapse. Some cinematic unraveling. Instead, what moved through her was colder and cleaner than grief. Release. Erica was already waiting when Natalie reached her townhouse. She opened the door before Natalie knocked, took one look at her face, and stepped aside without a word. That mercy nearly undid her. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and black tea. A lamp glowed in the corner. Somewhere in the kitchen, I settled in a pitcher with a small glass sound that felt impossibly normal. Natalie sat at the table and stared at her phone while it lit and dimmed, like a pulse refusing to die. Linda Thomas again. A cousin she had not spoken to in months. One of the junior curators, the museum director. An unknown number from her mother's church circle. Finally, a message from Erica's husband, Daniel, who had stayed at the event after Erica left. No one is on her side, it read. I need you to know that. Natalie closed her eyes. Erica set a mug of tea in front of her. What happened after you left, she said, was worse for her than for you. Natalie looked up slowly. Daniel called. Your mother stayed standing there for almost a full minute. No one moved to comfort her. No one rushed in to smooth it over. One of the trustees asked the staff to cut the microphone. Then your director stood up and said, very calmly, that the museum would always honor the people who built it, and that cruelty had no place in that room. People started leaving after that. Quietly. Deliberately. Like they were withdrawing something. Natalie let that settle into her chest. Not revenge. Not spectacle. Withdrawal. That was how power really shifted. Not in a scream. In a room deciding, all at once, what it would no longer tolerate. At 11:30 in the evening, a voicemail from Linda arrived. Natalie listened to it only once. Her mother cried. Then blamed. Then cried again. She said she had only wanted to tell the truth. She said Natalie had humiliated the family by walking out. She said a mother should not be punished for speaking honestly. There was no apology in the message. Not even the shape of one. Natalie deleted it. At 1:15 in the morning, Thomas texted. I am sorry. I should have stopped her. Natalie read the line 3 times. It hurt because it was true. It hurt because it was late. It hurt because even now, after all these years, he could only offer remorse once the damage was already complete. The next morning, the second truth arrived. Thomas called just after 9. His voice was raw, smaller than she had ever heard it. I cannot get into the insurance account, he said. Your mother says you usually handle it. And the cardiology office called about a missed confirmation for Tuesday. I do not know which portal has the forms. Natalie said nothing. He kept going, words stumbling now. The pharmacy says one prescription was never renewed. And your mother cannot find the church donation schedule. She thought maybe it was in your email. There it was. The hidden machinery. The invisible labor. The thousands of quiet turns of the wheel she had performed so faithfully that the people riding inside the carriage never once wondered who was pulling the weight. In the silence, Thomas seemed to understand what he was hearing for the first time. Not anger. Not refusal. Absence. How much were you doing? He asked, the question escaping him in a whisper stripped bare of pride. Natalie looked out Erica's kitchen window at the pale blue morning. A breeze moved through the trees with a sound like paper being turned. Enough, she said. More than you noticed. He did not defend himself. He did not say that is not fair. He simply breathed, and in that breath she heard a man standing in the wreckage of conveniences he had mistaken for ordinary life. Aunt Rebecca called that afternoon. I am not calling to ask you to go back, she said immediately. I am calling to tell you your mother has been telling a story about sacrifice for 30 years, and some of us have always known who was really paying for it. Natalie closed her eyes. Go to Portland, Rebecca said. Leave while the door is open. That night, Natalie went back to her apartment alone. The museum had already sent flowers. Her director had sent a handwritten note. 3 donors had emailed personal messages of support. One of the board members had written, "You deserved a better mother and a better witness beside her. I hope your future is larger than this city has allowed you to imagine." On the living room floor sat the box she had packed days earlier. Portland. This time, Natalie did not stare at it. She knelt. Opened a second box. Folded sweaters. Wrapped framed photographs. Stacked books. Every object she touched seemed to ask the same quiet question. Why did you stay so long? Because hope can look like duty when you have worn it for years, because fear is quieter than people think, because some daughters are trained so young to become pillars that they do not realize they are allowed to walk away from the roof. A week later, she boarded a flight west. Portland met her with slate clouds, cold air, and a city that did not know her old shape. In her new apartment, there were half-open boxes, bare windows, and the thin unfamiliar silence of a life no longer being interrupted every hour by someone else's need. On her first morning there, Natalie stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee warming both hands and drank it while it was still hot. No calls. No passwords. No appointments. No crisis with her name already assigned to the solution. Just rain at the window. Steam rising. Breath easing. For years, her family had mistaken her endurance for obligation. They called her difficult when she had boundaries, selfish when she had ambition, cold when she grew tired of bleeding in silence. But some truths do not arrive gently. Some come like a door blown open in the middle of the night. And once that door is open, you either spend the rest of your life explaining why you are still standing in the ruins, or you step through. Natalie stepped through. If you have ever been the invisible one holding everything together while everyone else called it normal, tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, delayed justice, and the kind of payback that does not shout because it does not need to, like this video, subscribe, and stay with Waters Payback.